Good morning, Madam Mayor and members of Council, and thank you for the opportunity to do this presentation at Council for the public. We, as you know, you heard this presentation on Monday at Budget Committee, and I appreciate Council's interest and endorsement of the direction that staff are proposing. And this presentation really comes out of a very high level of concern that has developed, and certainly that Council discussed a week ago, following the economic statement from the federal government and the decision to make some fairly significant tax cuts, but unfortunately ignore the infrastructure needs of cities across this country, notwithstanding the amount of information and technical data and the amount of lobbying that has been done by associations like the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to make the case, by other cities to make the case. The simple fact of the matter is the city's issues are being ignored at the federal level, and yet we need significant infrastructure investment. We're the economic engines of the country. Nobody disputes that. The dilemma is nobody's putting any gas in the tank. This illustrates where Canadian tax dollars go. As you can see, the municipal slice of the Canadian tax dollar pie is relatively small, with only 8% of all the taxes collected in the country going to municipalities. The province takes 32%, but the largest slice of the pie by far goes to the federal government. So we certainly know that the federal government, out of all the levels of government, have the most revenue capacity in this country. At the same time that you look at that slide, contrast it with the change in infrastructure ownership over the last 40 years. In 1961, you can see that municipal infrastructure at that point formed only 30% of all the infrastructure owned by levels of government in the country. In 2005, cities and municipalities now own 58% of all public infrastructure, and therefore are responsible for maintaining it and keeping it in a state of good repair. If you contrast that with what's happened at the federal level, clearly the Government of Canada has not been investing in infrastructure for a very long time, and we've seen that declining trend over the years, with the number or the proportion of federal ownership of infrastructure dropping from 33% in 1961 to only 12% in 2005. The proportion of Canadians living in cities in particular, and we keep seeing this as Statistics Canada releases consecutive census, is that Canadians are increasingly moving to cities. Today, 80% of all Canadians live in urban areas, and yet those urban areas are certainly being ignored, in our view, at the federal level in terms of the needs that it takes to make an urban community vibrant, to make it sustainable, and to ensure that citizens can continue to enjoy a quality of life that is often supported by the infrastructure that cities need in order to operate effectively. Certainly the media has picked up on this issue quite aggressively. An article by Jim Coyle last week in the Toronto Star basically made the case to say, at a time when we have outstanding economic performance, at a time when Canada's debt is one of the lowest in the G7, at a time when the federal government is running significant surpluses, if that's not the time to invest in our cities, then when is the right time? And I think we're asking the same question. Similarly, this was the front page of the Toronto Star, highlighting that, and the headline reading, Finance Minister Jim Flaherty's Halloween mini-budget cuts taxes left and right, but offers little for social programs, cash-strapped cities, or struggling manufacturers. And this picture, unfortunately, in Ontario in particular, I think resonates because, of course, we remember that Minister Flaherty was the provincial finance minister under the Mike Harris government. that did so much of the downloading to municipalities and created some of the structural issues we have in funding of municipal and provincial services today. And I think it's very, very discouraging to see the same philosophy now being applied on a national basis. FCM have said that Canadian cities and Canadian municipalities face an infrastructure deficit estimated to be between $60 and $100 million. And whatever we fix that number at, we know it's growing every year. Clearly, this is a significant missed opportunity on the part of the federal government, who are projecting underlying budget surpluses over the next 9 years totaling $65 billion. And yet their decision to cut taxes and pay down the financial debt, no new funding for capital investment, and ignoring the infrastructure deficit makes it very clear that cities are not on the radar screen. This is how the tax relief that was announced in the economic statement is distributed. Approximately 34% of the $188 billion over the next several years that will come to Canadians in the form of tax relief. 34% of it is in reduction of personal income taxes, 39% in the reduction of the goods and services tax, the 1% cut there, and 27% in terms of corporate income tax cuts to business. If you look at the impact on families and based on family income, the yellow box in the middle shows the range of income categories and the benefit accruing to families who are in that income bracket. However, the thing that we also want to highlight is that the cuts in the economic statement are a second wave of tax cuts. There have been previous reductions in the goods and services tax and previous income tax reductions. So we've also provided a total benefit that families have accrued since the Progressive Conservative government in Ottawa has started the tax cutting, but particularly highlighting the most recent cuts last week through the economic statement. Mississauga's infrastructure we estimate at a total of $7.7 billion, and this is a rough breakdown of the infrastructure that we have within our city that we're responsible for maintaining. 68% of our infrastructure, notably, is our road network, but we also have information technology, vehicles and equipment, our buildings, the building we're working in today as part of that inventory, and also our green infrastructure. Our need to maintain our parks and our outdoor amenities in a state of good repair contributes significantly to the quality of life of our citizens. And our reputation is a good one as a municipality. I think the one thing that Mississauga can boast about is the practical decisions that have been made over the years around ensuring that development pays for growth and that we have been able to put outstanding community infrastructure in place so that our citizens enjoy an outstanding quality of life within our buildings that are not in a state of good repair and ready to receive our citizens and provide service. This is a very recent example, and this is from London, Ontario, and the Mayor of London spoke out very strongly when this problem developed right in downtown London, that we need support from other levels of government. We need to get a head start on infrastructure renewal, and clearly, again, the kinds of problems that London experiences with their aging infrastructure is something that we do not want to see here in Mississauga. We have estimated, based on our capital projections, that over the next 20 years, our own part of that $60 to $100 billion infrastructure deficit is estimated at $1.5 billion. And to average that out over that 20-year period, we would need an additional $75 million more per year to eliminate our own infrastructure deficit. And to put that into perspective, our current capital budget is somewhere in the range of about $100 million a year. So that's almost doubling the amount of money that we're spending today. We've shown you these projections before that show you how the significant reserves that Mississauga was fortunate enough to build up over a number of years are declining as we spend them on keeping our infrastructure in a state of good repair. We've estimated that in 2012 we will join most other cities across Canada in having to borrow to maintain our infrastructure because we simply do not have the capacity to collect the money in advance to keep our infrastructure whole. As you know, as we've built it with development levies, we have to repair it with tax dollars. And so the obligation and the burden has shifted from those who are building in our city to those who are living in our city, and that is a huge challenge. Columnists have pointed out that there are other options to solve this problem. The province could move into that tax room and maybe increase a sales tax and give it to cities. The province have clearly said they're not going to do that. Mr. McGuinty, I was quoted in an article again in the paper this morning. And on some level, we support that. That takes the feds off the hook. This is a national problem. It isn't a problem that will be corrected in one province or even in one municipality. And we very, very strongly want to focus on the fact that it's the federal government that needs to step up, as other federal governments are doing in many other jurisdictions around the world, whether it's in Europe or the United States. The government of Canada needs to keep pace with the rest of the world in terms of ensuring that cities remain strong. We know that capital projects are being put on hold. They're not being funded within Mississauga. We've shown you in successive capital budgets unfunded lists of projects that have been identified but that we simply can't afford to do. We believe that there will be, at this point, based on the policies of the current senior levels of government, any more tax capacity to help with that infrastructure deficit. So we have a tough choice in front of us, but I think it is a choice that we have to look at as a city, and that is to do the job that the federal government isn't doing and doesn't apparently intend to do, and that is to step into the tax room that they've created by reducing personal income taxes, GST, and corporate income taxes. I think our message is to our citizens that while it is certainly wonderful to have additional dollars in your pocket by virtue of tax cuts, and we can all support tax cuts to some extent, there is, to use an expression again from last night, a quid pro quo. And the quid pro quo is cities have no choice but to keep an eye on the future, and if we can't get the funding that we need from senior levels of government, we at least have to step up and try and solve part of that problem ourselves. In Mississauga, the average household tax savings from the economic statement, we've estimated at about $602 for small business. If your net income is 100, or your taxable income is $100,000, you're saving $1,000, 1%. Similarly, for a large business, a net income of $1 million would save $10,000 based on last week's announcements. If we were to step into a portion of that tax room, and that is what staff are recommending we do, you can see what happens for every 1% that we choose to implement a special capital levy on our property tax. We would be asking each resident or each household to pay $10, a small business to pay $19, a large business on average to pay $194. We are actually recommending to Council that we implement for 2008 a special infrastructure property tax levy of 5%. That would take $50 per household, $97 per small business, and $974 per corporate business. Again, these are averages based on our average assessments and the estimated tax cuts. But in total, we anticipate that by taking that special infrastructure levy, we can earn an additional $12.75 million annually, which will help with our infrastructure problem. So again, we're really saying we need to take a slice off the top. We don't need the whole pie, although I will show you in a moment that by doing this we really are only solving a portion of our problem. But clearly, again, we don't want to take the senior governments off the hook completely, but we also can't step back and just wring our hands and do nothing. We have to use the limited tools that we have available to us. Similarly, for business, we are looking at just taking that slice off the top of the savings that they will earn as a result of the tax cuts. This shows our $75 million annual infrastructure deficit. This will take certainly some of the pressure off, but there is still much more that needs to be done, and we need to continue to ensure that we keep pressure on those senior levels of government to come to the table with more significant infrastructure investments than they've been able to provide to date. So our strategy is to redirect some of the tax room through a special levy to help close our own infrastructure deficit. We understand the need to carefully manage the impacts of the deficit, so we know that there will have to be a balance struck between property tax increases, as we're proposing, future capital spending, which will have to be managed because we still can't fund everything that we know we need to do, and of course managing external debt, which at this point is projected to be something to start from a capital budget funding perspective in 2012. On Monday, there were a number of questions asked by members of council with respect to the mechanisms for collection. Can we put a separate line on the tax bill? Are there other tools that we can use to clearly identify this special levy within our tax bill? We are still reviewing this, but I will tell you that our initial review of the legislation, as I mentioned on Monday, really restricts us in terms of what we can do. So we will certainly, I think, have to use other means to get our message out there to the citizens. But we will continue to look for options to clearly identify this separate line item on our tax bill. We basically are saying cities now, and this is the face of our campaign. It can't wait. The federal government does need to step up to the plate and do the job that it chose not to do last week. And certainly we want to speak to our municipal colleagues across the country, the associations that speak on our behalf on this issue, and continue to apply the pressure that has been applied to this government on a sustained basis to say, you have to come to the table. You cannot simply walk away. And by putting money in the pockets of the citizens, you're not helping to build the communities that they live in and that they work in and that they play in. So clearly, we have two goals: to try and influence the federal government and other key stakeholders towards long-term and sustainable, emphasis on the word sustainable, funding of municipal infrastructure, and also to conduct an information and education campaign with our own taxpayers about the federal government's decision to abandon cities like Mississauga, which means we have to step up and take some of that tax room as a special infrastructure levy to maintain our public infrastructure in a state of good repair and keep the quality of life for our citizens. We will be looking for key strategic partners like the Large Urban Mayors Caucus of Ontario, the Big City Mayors Caucus, FCM, AMO, the region, national trade associations and businesses. We're just delighted that the Board of Trade is here today, and Cheryl and I have already chatted about a role that they might play in our campaign. We have already scheduled a special meeting with our MPPs. We want to follow up with a meeting with our MPs. We will be looking at a number of communication tools, such as an insert with the property tax bill, a special newsletter from the mayor, and hoping to convene a special meeting of big city mayors possibly right here in Mississauga. We also know that we need to get the message out to our citizens, so we are looking at options. Clearly the website will be a tool, but we also want to look at getting something directly in their hands, maybe a pledge card. We've had some success with that kind of campaign before. And we also want to make sure that this campaign has some on-street presence, and certainly providing members of council who will be champions of this campaign with materials that they can use with their residents and ratepayer associations and the media. That's essentially my presentation, Madam Mayor. You have a resolution that has been drafted for council to consider. Again, we want to be front and center and visible with this. I think Mississauga has the reputation and the credibility to be able to make this case with the senior levels of government, drawing on the leadership of this council in going forward. And at this point, I would be happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Janice. As you know, the council appreciated the presentation last week, and we're now at the hope today that this will be an effort to get it across to the citizens as well. I have Councillor Mahoney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Janice. Good presentation and a little more information than we did have on Monday, not a lot. But I did say on Monday, Madam Mayor, colleagues, that I was going to the annual general meeting of one of my residents' association, and that I would bring this matter to them. Sherwood Forest, there were about 100 people in attendance, and they were very pleased. They asked intelligent questions. They were in a full agreement. The questions concern the future of this special levy, special tax, if in fact, and I believe I asked that question also on Monday myself, as to how we deal with this special tax as we go forward, and if the government changes, or government theories, philosophies, grants, and dollars flow. And I assured them, as I had been assured on Monday, this is something that can be halted, can be changed, can be stemmed, and it's not something that will continue as a tax that we seem to forget about and go into general revenues. Interestingly enough, the comments that were coming back were the appreciation from this community of the stability that they find within the city of Mississauga. We're politically stable, bureaucratically stable, and there's a reliance on their municipality that they know they can count on. And that was, I think, the strongest comment of support for this that I got, that they're willing to pony up, so to speak, and give that great consideration, recognizing that their municipality is doing this in good faith and will continue with the level of service. That was one of their concerns, was that they don't ever want to lose the level of service that they receive now from the city, and that as long as that level of the service can continue, they are willing to pay for that, I guess, is the comment. And so I thought that was a good sort of tilt of the windmill to see the reaction. As I say, it was a fairly affluent community, and we'll certainly get different reactions from the different communities that we go out and talk to, and that we approach, and the business community may have some other reactions. But for my first foray out to take this public, it was a very positive reaction from the folks, about 100 people in attendance.
Councillor Sato? No, Councillor Parrish, sorry. Councillor Parrish.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I support it 100%. I support good planning, and I'm not afraid to raise taxes as long as it's explained well and there's a real purpose to raising those taxes. I am concerned, though, a little bit about the approach. I think your tactics, as you listed them, getting other groups involved is very good. I think anything you can do to get other groups involved is very good. I just want to be a cautionary tale that we are not the children of the federal government. They are there to do great, wonderful things for the whole country, and they're there to do international and national events. And I can remember when I was parliamentary secretary to Mr. Galliano, the people from Vancouver kept asking for money to bail out their leaky condos. And the answer always was, well, if we bail out your leaky condos, then we're going to set your bylaws and we're going to come in and tell you how to build them. In '93, FCM was listened to by Mr. Kretchen and the Liberals because they were looking for a platform that was different from everybody else's. And we saw the birth of the infrastructure program. We have also seen gas taxes drop down from the federal government, and I think it's to recognize gridlock causes pollution, and pollution is a national issue. And I just want to be really careful, because I think if we say we're jumping in to fill a space that someone else has left, the very tired taxpayer is going to say, what the hell? We never get a break around here. So I think that approach to it, I would soften. I mean, it's just a suggestion. And I think antagonizing them before we get our BRT money is probably not a good idea either, because they're going to say, well, if you're putting on a surcharge for infrastructure, then you can pay for your own BRT out of that. Thank you very much. I think we're forced to do this because of the province, and I'm not here to fight with them either. The province has downloaded more on Ontario on social programming than any other well, no other province in Canada has done it. And if we had the space of 44 cents on the dollar that goes to human services, we could do all this. We could plan our infrastructure. We could have money for the things we're supposed to be doing. So I believe we have to still work on the province, and I think that's our first and most responsible level of government to, if we're going to be harsh with anybody, that's where I would be harsh, although I don't even believe in that. I can remember when I was a federal MP and we had to cut money for research. I got a letter from the professors from UTM, and it was your government and your prime minister, and don't you people understand how important research is? And we were trying to get our heads above water and balance a budget. And I went through it, old teacher that I am, with a red pen, and I circled all the angry words. And then I sent it back to them and I said, look at the angry words. And then the bottom line is, help us, please. Well, until you can write me a letter that actually asks for help in a way that we can be partners in this, don't send me these letters. And apparently it inspired a meeting of the staff there, because a friend of mine's husband was on, and they said, yeah, you know what, she's right. So I just want you to be really, really careful. I think you've got a brilliant idea. I think the idea of planning for infrastructure is good. And don't be sucked in by the media. The media is taunting us. They're saying, oh boy, somebody has to come out and start a campaign. They're going to be the first ones when we do this. They're not going to say, good for Mississauga. They're going to say, ha, don't you guys realize that you're the children of the province? So they'll flip it by tomorrow. So just be really, really, really careful. This is words of wisdom from someone who's been beaten up a few times.
You know, and they're great words, Councillor Parrish, and you know, I think we understand. I guess the part of the dilemma is we've been using that soft approach with technical papers. I mean, I could bring in a stack of papers that high from FCM that have done exactly what you've asked for and what you've suggested. I think, you know, there is a level of frustration. I wouldn't call it anger. I think my characterization of it would be, quite frankly, frustration. That notwithstanding, I think all of the best efforts, and there's a role for both of those levels of government, and I think that's what we're continuing to say. But your points are well taken, and we'll certainly consider that. And council will be very much a part of this campaign. I mean, it's not me to be the face of this, it's you and the mayor, and you know, it's a political campaign at the end, and we'll craft it using your input.
If I might just respond to that. It's such a good idea. It's a standalone idea. It doesn't have to be a punch in the face of the feds. It has to be Mississauga taking the lead, Mississauga acting responsibly, and Mississauga taxing fairly every one of its citizens, so we don't have bridges collapsing, so that we don't have roads flooded out. It's just a great idea on its own.
Councillor Slater.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted, I do have a comment, but I want to get a clarification, because I think it's important, because we're on Cable 10 and for the public. What we are proposing is a 5%. I mean, you throw out the $50, and I think what's going to hit is the $50, not the 5%. That is based on the average property in the city, excuse me, in the city of Mississauga. So someone having a property that was valued at $220,000, 5% of that would be much less than the $50.
So I think we have to make it very clear to our residents that they need to take a look at their tax bill, what they pay annually in taxes, and calculate that 5% on that amount. So if they pay $2,000 a year in taxes, then the 5% is going to be, it's not going to be $50. And unfortunately, when we use the average, that tends to be rather confusing for residents. And then when they get their tax bill, and those that are above the average, you know, they're paying more than the $50. And that's when the phone calls and the emails come in saying, well, you said it was a $50 surcharge or tax or whatever you call it. So I think we have to be very clear with whatever information we're giving. This is very timely because we're just finalizing my city newsletter. It's going to be going out in the next couple of weeks. So I've been holding a spot that I can do an article on this to explain to the residents, and that will go to every household in Ward 9. So they will have that information. But you know, I agree partly with Councillor Parrish that we're letting the province off the hook. But you know, when you talk about the social services, I mean, we have been fighting the pooling and the downloading of social service costs to the region of Peel for many, many years now. And we've been going about it in a very nice way. We've been, as you say, Janice, we've been providing the research, we've been providing the information, the statistics, and you know, somehow the media didn't pick up on what we've been doing until this year. And then, you know, we're accused of not doing enough. Sometimes, you know, and the amount of time that we as regional councillors have spent on trying to get pooling stopped at the regional level has just been phenomenal. The amount of work that has gone on from staff and council on that, and it's been extremely frustrating that, you know, we finally did get something from the provincial government, that it will be phased out, but look how long it took. Now, it wasn't that government that put it in. It was a previous government that put it in, but Councillor Parrish, as you know, I've always said that money, if it comes back to the region, or if it doesn't come back, and we don't have to spend it to provide the social services in Toronto, we have a list a mile long of social service needs in the region of Peel, and that money should be directed into that. To me, it's not an infrastructure money. There's a very, very real need for our citizens in the region. And I think we need to really separate that out from what we are doing today. This is strictly infrastructure, and it has to be very open, very transparent, where that additional, and it is a tax. There's no, as you say, there's no way we can do it as an additional levy. Well, it is a levy, but it is going to be, the headlines are going to be that we're increasing taxes by the amount that we're working on right now, the 3.9, and trying to get below that, probably about 3.5, I guess we're working towards. And this will be an additional 5%. So the headline's going to be that we're raising taxes 8%. And it's going to be a tough one to get the message out to residents that yes, we are doing that, but that 5%, and it has to be shown very, very clearly in everything we do, that it's very transparent which budget it's going into, that it is for infrastructure, renewal, renovation. And I think we can show very clearly where the money is planned to be spent. And I know I'll be doing that with my residents, that 'cause the question always will be, well, you know, I'm paying this much more, what am I going to get out of it? And I think we can show that. I don't think it's that difficult to show. And as Councillor Mahoney was saying, her residents understood that. But it is a tough message. It's hard to get beyond the tax increase message that gets out there. But I think too, by getting other cities involved, and when I first saw Cities Now, I thought, well, that's not very personal to Mississauga. But as you went on and talked about getting working with FCM and AMO, and more cities that get on that and work with us, that's where the impact is really going to be. And again, Councillor Parrish, I do think the federal government has a responsibility. Yes, the role is very clear, providing those services across Canada and working with other countries around the world, but There always has been. We are, I think, the only federal government that does not support their cities. I think Canada probably supports the cities federally less than any other major government in the world. And that is not something that we should be proud of at all. So I will support this. I raised some concerns on Monday, but I think it is the right thing to do. And I think it's the only thing to do. I don't think we have any choice.
Councillor Carlson.
Thanks very much, Madam Mayor. I'm happy to second the motion to introduce this levy, and I think at a very real level, when we deal with the general public, and I'm not talking about the half dozen that call to give us what for when they get their tax bill, but when you talk to regular folks every day of the week, they understand the value of infrastructure. They have an investment in their homes. Mississauga's real estate goes up to at least 10 or 12% per year. They have a huge investment in their properties and their businesses here, and they've chosen to live in one of Canada's most prosperous cities. The corollary to that is that it costs money to maintain that type of infrastructure, and the inflation rate within the construction industry is not 3% a year like it is in perhaps the general inflation rate. So I think there's a good general understanding of that, and when you tell people we're putting money into one particular area like infrastructure, they understand that, and we're not adding more staff and we're not buying Cadillacs for the councillors. We're actually protecting your investment in your community, and I don't mind, and I think it's equally important that we go after the feds and the province and everybody else to bring them to the table. Canada has this quaint system where whenever we have federal conservatives in charge, they take the old Tory view, draw the line. You know, it's the province that's in charge of municipalities, not the federal government. But they're also in the business of redistributing wealth back to the provinces, which could flow through to us. So they take a very strict view that they're not going to fund cities, but there are many, many ways that the federal government could be involved to make sure there's a flow through back to the municipalities. And I think that's all that we're asking for. You know, but in the meantime, I recall, you know, the Russian proverb that a man doesn't have to fear drowning if he prays to God and learns how to swim. So we, in the meantime, we have to learn how to swim ourselves. I had the pleasure of driving to Detroit a couple weeks ago, and if you ever want to see what happens if you don't invest in infrastructure, if I had woken up in that car, I wouldn't even know where I was. I would have thought I was in some war-torn country. So, you know, it's an extreme example, but if you really want to see what happens, and you want to see capital fly out of the city, just ignore the needs of your city long enough. And I know many municipalities over the years that steal a little bit out of their capital budget because a broken road doesn't complain. And you can ignore it long enough until there's a hell of a mess with the substructure. And, you know, you're paying triple or quadruple to fix it. So for me, I don't have a hard time explaining this. And as I said, I'm pleased to move or second the motion and to get on with the business of explaining it to Mississauga's taxpayers. Thank you.
Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, I think it's just how we sell this. You know, a strong majority of the citizens here in Mississauga enjoy the quality of life that they receive here in Mississauga, and I think it's just another progressive step that we're taking to ensure that they continue that quality of life here in the city. But it's how we sell it, and I'll give you an example. Like, you throw out the $50, and then people may think it's $50 for everyone, and Councillor Sato raised a good point with respect to that. Then you throw out the 5%, and people think it's 5% of their taxes, and in fact what it really is it's 5% of the city's portion, which is, I think, a little less than 25%. So even if you round it into 25%, that comes out to 1.25% of your total tax bill. I think that's an important message to send to the community of what the actual dollars are going to be, because it's not $50, it's not 5%, although it is 5% of the city's portion, and it's how we sell that. The other thing I'm concerned about in how we deliver this message is this year, if I'm not mistaken, in 2008, is a reassessment year.
Yes.
So there's going to be the public that are going to either be reassessed and their properties may be reassessed lower so they benefit. There may be properties that are reassessed higher, so they're going to be, their taxes are going to increase just through assessment. So we have a real challenge that we have to explain what the actual budget was for the city of Mississauga, what that portion was, what this new levy is, together with explaining assessment. And that's a major challenge for us to communicate to the community. But I think it's important that we realize that, and that we do our homework and we explain it well to the community so they know exactly what part of their taxes were for each of the items I just mentioned. So it's not going to be easy, but you know, and it's difficult again when as little as the feds may be giving back to each individual taxpayer, they're giving, we're taking. And I think, again, it's got to be explained why we're taking it. It's because they didn't do it properly. They didn't invest in the infrastructure across the big cities that they should have.
And a couple of comments, Councillor Dale. If Council will recall, the way the province has now chosen to implement reassessment is a 4-year phase-in, so some of those impacts won't happen. They won't happen all in year 1, it'll be phased in, but your point's well taken. So we'll have to look at a range of property values or some other way of getting that message across.
Councillor Mullen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, it becomes a vicious circle, doesn't it? You've got the province looking to the federal government, we're looking to the province, and it's all one taxpayer. But if you take a look at the circle and the fact that the Canadian tax dollar goes to the municipality only at 8%, and certainly the federal being at 60 and the provincial at 32, it really speaks volumes, doesn't it, in terms of the fairness and the balance. I guess the difficulty I have is the issue of the 5% as it relates to the average assessment of $365,000. For some of us, we do not have those kinds of assessments. Our assessments are much higher than that. So you're really not looking at $50. You're looking at a considerable amount more than that. And as Councillor Dale has indicated, you've got the reassessment, and again, for some of us, that has been a major impact over the last several years, and many of people who are on fixed income, and that's a whole different argument, and we've done it, and we've said it, and we've gone over it numerous times at the city. So I guess my concern is the 5%. I could support the 1%. I think 5% on the homes that are way beyond the average of 365 is going to be a major impact. I took a look at the projections that were presented to us on Monday. In 2009, 2010, we're looking at a major increase in terms of percentage on the mill rate. So that, again, will have a bigger impact. So we're really not looking, we could be looking in some areas of the city where you're looking at 9 and 10% of an increase. And I have a real difficulty supporting that. So I certainly think it's the right thing to do. I think as Councillor Parrish had indicated on Monday, the public is tired of us blaming other levels of government for our problems. We have to take responsibility and we have to step up to the plate. I think we have to do it, though, in a reasonable and acceptable manner. So I will be supporting the 1%. I cannot support the 5%. And it's really based on, again, I'm not looking at $50. I'm looking at a lot more than that. And the combination of all the other things is really going to impact certain areas of the city.
Councillor Adams.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Councillor Sato and Councillor Mahoney for raising the issue of transparency when it comes to this tax. You know, I guess the old joke is that income taxes were instituted to pay for the war. The war has long been paid off, and we still continue to collect income taxes. And so I do want that to be crystal clear that if the province or the feds were to ever step in, and I dearly hope they would, but I sincerely doubt they ever would, step in and take over all of our infrastructure funding, that obviously this levy would be eliminated. It really is a temporary measure. But there's that old expression, you dance with the one who brung you, and I think the federal government's looking at it, and no seat in Mississauga was delivered to the federal government. But every seat provincially was delivered to the current sitting government, and they've got a brand new mandate. And so I think we ought to still continue to pursue the province. We are the children of the province. If they were ever going to help us, this would be the time to help us. And they do have the responsibility to help us with our bridges and our infrastructure. And I think that's a critical element. You know, there's a lot of difficulty here. I think the province and the provincial government is a little gun shy. They instituted a health tax, and they received a great deal of criticism from the general public for it, because the public said, well, you know, I still have wait times when I go to the doctor, or if I need a CAT scan. Why didn't all of this magically disappear? So I think we need to be very, very careful in the messaging on this infrastructure fund. This will just let us keep pace. People expect services, they expect bridges, they expect the roads to be there. This funding, or this 5% levy, isn't going to build brand new bridges and so on. It's merely going to allow us to keep pace and to provide the level of service that Mississauga residents expect. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Prentice?
Thank you. I spoke more to it at the Monday meeting, so I don't want to repeat myself, but I think it's quite clear that the federal government has shirked their responsibility to cities, and I guess that probably is based on the fact none of the large cities elected a conservative. And I guess all I have to say is it's time to do the right thing and not the politically right thing. And they are doing the, quote, politically right thing, in my view, by lowering the GST, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The right thing to do is to ensure that their residents, as well as our residents, live in cities that are viable, and they're not doing it. So I don't think we have a choice other than to move forward on this.
Okay, let's look at the resolution. There's one little amendment I would like to make to it before I speak. Whereas the Government of Canada will not fulfill its obligation to cities and their infrastructure needs in view of a major surplus at the federal level. I think we should try to emphasize that throughout. Well, in my opinion, we are doing the right thing. We shouldn't have to do it, but we have no choice. I think some of you have said it so well. By the way, the mini-budget is not the budget that's coming down. And let's remember that. The mini-budget is a statement, and the big budget is about to come. So we got to put up a fight before the big budget comes. So that's what this is all about, is to put the fight up. They better look at it, and you'll notice that it's adopted in principle. The federal government comes forward with the infrastructure funding anywhere near the 5% that we need. I'm sure that the council will then deal with it at budget, which is when we will formally deal with this. So we have to really go after it. I don't care. They've turned us down, and they've turned down the 1 cent approach of the Federation and the Big City Mayor's Caucus. The point is, forget about the 1 cent. We need money for infrastructure. And what we've got to convince the citizens that we need money for infrastructure. And what we're saying to the citizens of Mississauga, if you want to continue, and I think Councillor Adams, you said, well, if you want to continue for our bridges to be safe, for our roads to be in good condition, and by the way, there are cities that the roads are not in good condition. I mentioned on Wednesday, I think, about Hamilton. They just can't afford the money for infrastructure to keep the roads. Now, I think if you drive to Toronto, I think you do run into a few. The point is that the cities need the money, and we've got to build a campaign. In regard to the provincial government, Councillor Parrish, the Premier set up a task force, and that is reporting in February, and it is the most thorough analysis we've done of the gap between the province and the municipalities. And Jim Watson was out to see me yesterday, and Janice and I met with him. And I can assure you, we quickly told them that they better take action on this report that's coming forward. And I believe since the Premier set it up, if he backs down on it in any way, it would be somewhat embarrassing. Because quite honestly, it was he who recommended the task force. And as I said to Jim Watson yesterday, I've been on many of these task forces, and they've gone nowhere. This one will be the last one. And if it doesn't accomplish what we need in this province of Ontario, then don't set up any more task force, because it's just wasting time of local politicians. That report is being worked on very diligently by the staff of the major cities and the regions. And that report will come forward in February. And then it comes to the political table. And I think we've said at the political table, and I think I warned the minister yesterday, you're going to have a fight on your hands if you don't put some of these things into operation. I think we have to get rough. I think the time is that we can't sit back anymore and just pass resolutions, do task forces, etc. And by the way, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has been successful. I remember we worked on infrastructure funding from the federal government for 10 years before they finally announced the infrastructure. We worked on them for 8 years to get the fuel tax. We got it. So there has been some successes when we really harness our forces and unite. I will be taking this, and Janice will be making this presentation to the large urban mayors in Oshawa next week. The Mayor of Toronto is coming. First time that he's come to a large urban mayors, and I've said to him that we're taking a strategic plan to the large urban mayors, and I believe that this will be adopted across the province by the large urban municipalities. It says to the federal government, if you don't come across with the money, then this is what's going to happen in the municipalities. I think that's what the message is. That's what this council is saying, in my opinion. If you come across with the money, then we will not take it. But what is happening is the federal government is putting it into this pocket and wants the provincial and local government to take it out of this pocket. It's a sham. That's what I call it, a complete sham. And to win an election, that's why they're doing it, putting money in the pockets of the citizens. Well, the citizens better realize that, yes, it's nice to get an income tax deduction in the Greater Toronto Area, but there's an article in the paper, and I'm not sure I distributed to all members of council, the number of people that are dying every year because of pollution in the GTA, the smog days we have. Surely the people will realize that we got to get our infrastructure in shape in the GTA. And Mr. Flaherty, as I say, he was finance minister in the province when they downloaded everything on us, when the only province in the country that is responsible for social housing. Come on. And now he's Minister of Finance in Ottawa. Does he change his approach? No. And the Prime Minister of Canada is not interested in municipalities. I think that's confirmed. I've talked to many mayors across the country, and they all feel that we can't get our position across to the federal government. We did with the Liberal government. We got to give them credit. They gave us infrastructure funding. And by the way, the Federation was scared to death that this government would cut it out, the infrastructure funding, and especially the fuel tax. After this government was elected, the big city mayor's caucus was very concerned that this government would cut our fuel tax. Fortunately, they continued to do it. So, yes, the provincial government, and not this government that was re-elected, they made some effort towards cutting the downloading. Not enough, no question about it. Just a simple phasing of the pooling, the ODSAP they came across with, but again phased, and it should be a shorter period of time, but at least it's a step in the right direction. What we are getting from the federal government, we don't care about you. Forget about infrastructure. And I agree with the councillors, Councillor Sato and Councillor Dale, and others that said, we got to emphasize that this is infrastructure. It is not used for all the other things, right? That it is infrastructure, and it will only be spent on infrastructure, and it will be spent on a priority basis of infrastructure. So folks, we have no choice but to go. The 5% is a reality check. No question about it. We can drop it to 1, but then we're fooling ourselves if we do. At this point, it's 5%, and let's stick to the 5%. And then if something happens before we adopt the budget in January, we can adjust accordingly, right? We can decide then. But at the present time, it's got to be 5%. That's what the staff has told us we need, And to play around with that at this point is just playing games. So let's go with it's agree in principle. Would you please read the motion carefully? Agree in principle. And if anything happens, if the provincial government comes forward with something, then we can look at the 5%. The federal government comes forward with something, we can look at the 5%. And then we can decide in January whether we want to go with the 5% at all. It is not a final decision of this council. But we've got to get the program going, and we've got to get the message across to the citizen. I'm pleased, Councillor Mahoney, with the reaction. Isn't that wonderful, you know? And, but let's go. Okay, I have a, are you? Yeah, Councillor Mahoney.
I'm not playing around with the 5%. My issue is that it's based on assessed value. If we're talking about a levy, it should be a levy for every single home because infrastructure benefits all of us. Once you tie it to assessment, then you've got problems in terms of the assessment changing year to year and the impacts on various parts of the city. Therein lies my issue. I'm not fooling around with the 5%. I'm basing a point based on the issue of assessment. It's always back to assessment, and the assessment varies, and that will be an impact. So I'm not fooling around with the 5%. I have an issue with why we can't simply put down a one-time amount that we deal with on a yearly basis that is for everybody, because infrastructure helps everybody, not just a particular community.
It's true, Councillor Mullen, it's very true. And quite honestly, if I'm living in a house that's worth $900,000, which I am doing, I'm prepared to pay the 5% because I don't want somebody living in a townhouse paying what I should be paying. I have to tell you, it's regressive in my opinion. So, okay, you've heard. Do you agree with the amendment I made or suggested? Yeah, that we repeat the surplus, the major surplus. And I have a motion by Councillor Unica, and by the way, Councillor Unica spoke out very strongly on this, and the example you used. Moved by Councillor Unica, seconded by by Councillor Carlson. And do I need to read the motion? Taken as read? Pardon? Yeah. All in favor of a short reading of the motion. All in favor of the motion. Any opposed? Carried.